Kia ora. Tēnā koe. Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai. Welcome everybody to Rangahau Rising, Bioprotection Aotearoa. Ko Waipara tēnei. I'm your MC for today, and we've got a great lineup. We'll go through what we're going to hear and do today, but first I'll open once I've cleared my throat, I will do a karakia me te timatanga to bless this hui. Tūtaua mai I ranga, tūtaua mai I raro, tūtaua mai I roto, tūtaua mai I waho, kia tau ai te Māori tū, te Māori ora ki te katoa. Haumia hui, tae ki he. And so opening and blessing our hui today, for those of you who have a smartphone, which must be 100%, reminding you that there's the Tukutuku app, the BA Bioprotection Aotearoa app around Te Reo and Tikanga. So I have strongly advised people to go to your app store and download it. It's for free. But yes, we're blessed today, and we're equally blessed today for having an amazing speaker. Oh, there you go. Thanks. There you've got the links to the app store to the Tukutuku app. First, a bit of housekeeping before I introduce our wonderful speaker today. Please put any questions or comments into the chat. You won't be able to ask them directly, but we will wait till the end to do a proper Q&A session. But yeah, just put everything in the chat, and I will read them, or we will have a corridor discussion after our amazing speaker has finished her presentation. So on that note, I would really like to nau mai haere mai welcome Dr. Elizabeth Elliot Noe. A little bit about her. She's an interdisciplinary researcher at Lincoln University whose work explores how people, farming systems and biodiversity interact in Aotearoa's working landscapes. A former researcher with Bioprotection Aotearoa during the Tranche 1 program, her research focuses on social and ecological factors that influence how biodiversity can be supported within our productive agricultural ecosystems. So I guess part of the research, it's the he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. It's the people and those influences around our biological systems. But that's a terrible way to say it. It could be social science, sort of, maybe. I don't know. I'm going to let our wonderful speaker, Elizabeth, introduce herself and get underway with her presentation. So kia ora everyone for joining.
Kia ora, Nick. Thank you for that introduction. And I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. Share. And just confirming, Nick, that you can see my presentation.
Yes, okay. And it's in presentation mode. And how's the sound? Is everyone okay with the sound? Yep. 1, 2, 3. Yep, no, that's there and clear. So kia ora.
Okay, great. Yeah, again, thank you, Nick, and thank you everyone who's joined. And I'm going to dive right into it just because I'm probably going to go over time a bit. So thanks to New Zealand's fertile soil, abundant sunshine, and temperate climate, our cows spend around 350 days every year grazing outdoors on lush green grass. Thanks to our natural approach to farming, our cows live long and healthy lives. Because the dairy systems are pasture-based, they have a relatively low carbon footprint per unit production. Our milk is naturally nutritious with multiple health benefits. The dairy industry plays a central role in creation of jobs and wealth in New Zealand. Intensive dairy farming is making our climate, our water, and our communities sick. The dairy industry is New Zealand's biggest climate polluter and a major stressor on biodiversity and soil health. Runoff from dairy farms is poisoning our rivers, lakes, and our drinking water. A dairy cow will on average have 4 to 6 calves over the course of her prematurely short 6 to 7 year life. Each year, around 2 million bobby calves are taken from their mothers when they are just days old and trucked to slaughterhouses to be killed. So I took the words for the first slide, mostly from Fonterra, Dairy NZ, and with a bit of Federated Farmers. And the second slide was mostly Greenpeace and SAFE, which is an animal rights NGO. And what I'm hoping that gave you an idea of is the polarity and the debate around dairy farming in New Zealand. And this is happening globally as well, but today we're just going to focus on New Zealand. So what I wanted to do for the last bit of research that I did with Bioprotection Aotearoa was to explore how we are coming to such different representations of what dairy farming is, what it does, and what it should be. So I'm going to give you sort of a whirlwind introduction to dairy in New Zealand. So most of the world's agricultural land is used for livestock production, and people are becoming increasingly concerned with the large land, water, and energy requirements and environmental consequences of dairy production when compared with other foods. So intensification, since about starting or accelerating after World War II, has meant that farms have become larger, dairy herds have become larger, and we have increased milk production per cow and per hectare. However, this has meant that there are fewer farms and fewer people working on those farms. Intensification has been enabled by an increased use of synthetic fertilizers, imported feed, and irrigation. And irrigation has allowed dairy farming to spread into regions that previously were too dry, so don't get enough rainfall naturally. So the Canterbury Plains is the prime example. So over the course of about 30 years, the dairy herd has increased from 3.4 to 5.9 million cattle. There's also been an increase in land used for dairy farming. And another example of intensification is the increase in fertilizer use. So 629% increase from 1991 to 2019. And that's applied to all farmland, but about half of that goes on to dairy. So intensification necessarily has environmental consequences. So a lot of you, I'm sure, have heard the public debate around the impact of dairy farming on water quality. Dairy cattle contribute about 1/4 of our greenhouse gas emissions, so we are quite unique globally in our sort of greenhouse gas emissions profile. Such a large number of cattle necessarily can cause soil compaction and erosion, and native biodiversity and native ecosystems are placed under stress by intensive dairy farming. However, agricultural exports are an important part of our economy. So we export 95% of the dairy that we produce. As of in 2024, dairy was our biggest export earner, contributing about 34% of total exports. So when I started out with bioprotection, I didn't know any of that. I joined wanting to look at how we could encourage more native biodiversity in our farming systems, since pastoral agriculture covers so much land in New Zealand. So the first bit of the research that I did, I went out and I talked to dairy farmers in the Waikato and Canterbury, but I won't be talking about that today. So if you're interested, there are, that's that first publication on the screen. And Bioprotection has lots of links to various outputs from that study. But based on those interviews with dairy farmers, we had a few themes that kept coming up, not related to native plantings. And these were around a sense of increasing societal pressure on farmers, sort of blaming them for greenhouse gas emissions and water quality, and a sense of hearing lots of different opinions about where they should be going in the future and what they should be doing, and these were often sort of contrasting or pulling them in different directions. So based on that work, we've got a second paper that's in review, but hopefully coming out soon. But today, that final paper listed is what we've written based on the work that I'll be presenting today. So having talked to farmers and heard about the challenges that they're facing, we then wanted to go to dairy industry experts and figure out where these different narratives about the future of dairy were coming from. So this part of the study, we explored the justifications used by a range of actors who are publicly debating the present status and the desirable future of the dairy industry. And we specifically wanted to know, how do the visions for the future of dairy differ, and start digging into why. So we interviewed 23 professionals with expertise related to some aspect of the dairy industry. And we wanted to capture a range of views, a range of expertise, and we also wanted to talk to people who have some sort of public voice, so they're influencing the public debate in some way. So that could be through opinion pieces, coming on the radio, giving interviews, doing research that they're getting out beyond the academic community, that sort of thing. So hopefully this table gives you an idea of the range of areas of expertise of our participants. So soil science, economics, freshwater ecology, ruminant nutrition, grassland ecology. And I've grouped the participants roughly into the 3 groups in terms of their desired future for dairy. And I'm going to be talking about this for the rest of the presentation, so hopefully it becomes clear what the different groups mean. So to analyze the data, we used a narratives of change framework, which combines future studies with narrative analysis. So I took each interview and I looked at the rationale. So why does this person think that the world has to change? What are the current problems? The plot. So how is the desired future achieved? What developments, activities, entities, or people work towards or against the desired future? And the resolution. So what does the desired future look like? I'm going to start with no dairy because this was my smallest group and it's the easiest to explain. So this group believed that animals are sentient beings with complex inner worlds, families, and experiences that matter to them. And because of that, they thought that animals deserve the same rights and treatment as people. So dairy farming for this group is fundamentally unethical. They also brought up concerns around water, soil, climate, biodiversity. They talked about the difficult and stressful working conditions for farmers with high debt loads. And they also talked about the social and environmental harms of New Zealand dairy that are caused by New Zealand dairy in other countries. So, for example, deforestation for palm kernel extract, or importing phosphate from Western Sahara. So this group believed that we needed a radical transformation in our agricultural systems to regenerative, organic, plant-based food systems. This would require people adopting vegan diets, and they saw some promise for alternative proteins like precision fermentation. So obviously the desired future had no animals in agriculture. They wanted every New Zealander to have access to safe and healthy food. And they thought that by removing animals from our agricultural systems, this would result in swimmable rivers, safe drinking water, a stable climate, and flourishing native biodiversity. So as Molly put it, I think it's going to end up being too difficult to try and fit a square peg into a round hole and make dairy sustainable and ethical. I think the solutions have to be more radical. It could begin with a just transition policy for dairy farmers because that's an industry with so many casualties, environmental and non-human. That's our vision, a plant-based food system. So now we'll sort of go to the other end of the spectrum, so what I've called better dairy. So this group tended to believe that our current dairy systems and practices are already acceptably good, and while there's always room for improvement, no drastic changes are needed, and they're happy with our current trajectory. So there was a deep sort of sense of pride in the dairy industry and its history and in its cost efficiency. As Caleb argued, as a farming nation, we are innovative, creative, we are leaders. We are leading the way in all of this, talking about addressing water pollution, to be better than before. So this group did acknowledge that dairy farming has environmental impacts, but they thought that the dairy industry was responding well to these, and they'd give examples of planting and fencing waterways, or they are working towards solutions, things like methane inhibitors, or they would argue that some level of environmental pollution is justified because we are growing food. So as Hugh put it, the methane, the best thing you can do at the moment is acknowledge that we're feeding a lot of people in the world. And because our dairy systems are pasture-based, animal welfare was considered to be relatively high, but again, there was room for improvement. So they wanted, some people wanted to see more shade and shelter, and Hugh especially argued for greater diversity in the cow's diet. So this group, they acknowledged environmental pollution, but also sometimes tended to frame it as more of a problem with public perception around environmental impacts and animal welfare. They talked about the fast pace of regulation change, creating high levels of stress for farmers, and that linked with the high cost of land and trouble finding workers who want to work within the dairy system. And this, so they would talk about how we've kind of lost, we used to have where dairy farmers would start as contract milkers and kind of work their way up into land ownership. But now, because of the high cost of land, they can no longer do that. So it's hard finding people who want to work on dairy farms. They talked about climate change, but it tended to be more in terms of the challenges of adapting to climate change. And some people talked about uninformed consumers who were demanding either contradictory things, so for example, decreasing greenhouse gas emissions, but also getting rid of bobby calves, or criticizing people arguing for diets that don't have animal products in them. So the desired future, the way to work towards it, they argued for investment in research and technology that would decrease greenhouse gas emissions. So this is things like methane inhibitors and vaccines, or that would reduce labor requirements. So virtual fencing, automatic gates, that sort of thing. They wanted to see more investment in on-farm infrastructure to adapt to climate change. So examples were barns, standoff pads, trees, alternative forages. They wanted more education for consumers, convincing them of the health of dairy products and the unhealthiness of plant-only diets. And they wanted better marketing, so selling a better story of the sustainability of New Zealand's dairy. So the desired future was basically sort of what we have now. So either maintaining or increasing profitability while decreasing or mitigating environmental degradation. They wanted all New Zealanders to be proud of the dairy industry and all forms of agriculture. And they wanted highly innovative processors creating value for their products and sharing higher returns with stakeholders. And they wanted the industry to once more provide a career pathway for farmers. So as Ethan concluded, there must be a way of achieving really good production outcomes, really good economic outcomes, and really good environmental outcomes in a profitable system. My dream is that you could do both. Some people think about diverse land uses, but I think we can do it in dairy. So the less dairy group was my biggest, so it's going to take me the most time to get through. But this group argued that the only way to decrease environmental harms caused by dairy was to reduce cattle numbers. And this varied from 10 to 20% decrease in the national herd to 1 cow per hectare. They were less likely to frame this as a problem with public perception or believe that it's been adequately addressed to date by the industry. And they argued that the countrywide response has been too slow and inadequate. They also tended to use stronger words. So instead of biodiversity loss, they would say biodiversity collapse, or instead of climate change, use the term climate catastrophe. So as Mike argued, I don't think there's anything wrong with dairy farming per se. It's not what we're doing, it's how we're doing it. That industrial model, massive amounts of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer going on, which is made from fossil fuels. Fertilizer is driving all the nitrate problems that are in the rivers and lakes and estuaries. If you get out of that system, take all those external inputs away, then the only way it will run is about 1 cow per hectare. That's the natural level that you'll always bounce back to if you're not bringing in palm kernel and all those other things. Then you get back to a healthy level of farming where you can have healthy waterways and healthy animals and healthy people. We'll either do that or we'll destroy ourselves like we are at the moment. Or Jonathan, who's coming from a farm systems background, the externalities, or whatever you want to call them, are just too great at present for New Zealand pastoral dairy farming to survive in its current form. It's good to plant trees, but it doesn't really affect things like nitrate leaching or greenhouse gases. There's not enough of that done to have an effect. It's part of the delaying project. You can point to it, oh, we've done this, and look how many kilometers of fencing we've put in, but it's not actually addressing the main issue. So this group also had social concerns. So while better dairy would point to the benefits or the contribution of dairy farming to GDP and export earnings, some in this group would counter-argue that these financial benefits are not equally shared. So for example, Rabari, for me, the important thing is the impact that these things have on society. I think the impact of degrading our natural resources for the individual benefit of some, without the consent of the others, is a far more grievous thing than any impacts economically on those people who have been fortunate enough to make enormous profits for a really, really long time. So other problems that people brought up were concerns over animal welfare. So again, inadequate shade and shelter, but also the very short, unhappy lives of bobby calves. Again, the high cost of land and high farmer debt and stress, difficult working conditions on farms, so long hours and physically demanding work, but uniquely the excessive consumption of animal products. So the desired future to work towards it would require consuming fewer animal products, but better quality and more humanely farmed. So this could result in a need to pay higher costs for food, but some argued that we need to value food more highly anyway. And some wanted to see a shift in focus from prioritizing increasing export earnings to ensuring that all New Zealanders have access to healthy food. So as Matteo put it, milk will have to be something special that we use carefully because it's a wonderful product, right? But we cannot drink it in a bucket in the morning or make it into powder or put it into everything. So other ways towards the desired future included agroecology, or some people use the term permaculture or regenerative agriculture, but they sort of shared this desire for a much greater level of diversity throughout farming and agricultural systems. They wanted to see investment in science, research, and extension, but this time that would support alternative agri-food systems. Some people talked about degrowth, which is sort of living with less stuff and shifting the focus away from economic growth to well-being. And one way they thought we could move towards a better future was by having better conversations, better national debate with a greater diversity of stakeholders. As Matteo argued, I don't have all the answers, but if we don't even want to talk about it, that's what we're doing now. We don't want to even think about the problem that we have. Or Peter, we can't have certain conversations in New Zealand because of the dairy industry. We can't have a sensible policy about freshwater quality, standards for drinking water, land use, greenhouse gases, energy. We can't because of the dairy industry, because of 3.5% GDP. That's the reason we can't do it, because of an overblown sense of importance. So this group argued for a more holistic approach that considers all the problems simultaneously, which some thought would require a system-wide transformation. So Matteo again, when I look at these things, talking about techno-fixes, they are partial solutions for nitrogen leaching. But what about climate change? What about animal well-being? What about resilience? A whole heap of other things, image. So what I propose is that we need to redesign the whole thing, start from scratch, because the system we have now has been improved to perfection. Perfection in the sense that it has reached the maximum it can be. So as part of that sort of system-wide transformation, some argued that we also need to change our economic systems. So these were sort of arguments against neoliberalism. It's the big economic systemic issues that need to be thought about in order to generate change. And that comes more from that political economy area, where our leadership needs to think about what's our vision. Are we going to continue to be export growth-led, GDP-focused, or are we going to be about caring for te taio, whakamana te taio, which is about realigning our economic activities towards something that's more about an ethic of care, caring for Papatuanuku. So they shared No Dairy's preference for regenerative organic systems, but this time they were integrated crop livestock systems instead of plant-based. They wanted greater diversity throughout land use at multiple scales. Some people talked about having interconnected farming blocks that were owned by communities within catchments, so more sharing of machinery, expertise, all those sorts of things across a community, and having more people actually working on the land. And similarly to No Dairy, they wanted the focus to shift from export earnings to providing healthy, high-quality food to all New Zealanders. So the less No Dairy group differs from the Better Dairy in how drastic they think the environmental damage of dairy farming is. And they tend to view the problems as widespread, multidimensional, found throughout or built into the system. And therefore, they want radical, fast, system-wide change. And while Better Dairy had more of a sense of pride and optimism, Less and No Dairy had more of a sense of urgency and despair, and that we are running out of time. So that sentiment, I think, is well encapsulated by Rod Orum's quote from 2021. We cannot achieve the linked goals of healthy people and a healthy planet by incremental improvements to existing systems. They are too broken, their damage is too great, and our time is too limited. So hopefully my talk has shown that there are still some major tensions between these three groups in terms of what level of environmental degradation is acceptable, how vital the industry is to the national economy, how valuable milk powder is to human health and nutrition, and what level of cattle welfare is afforded by our current systems. There are some areas of potential agreement, and by this I mean these things came up across the three groups. So people tended to agree that certain areas are not suitable for dairy farming due to, for example, porous soils in the Canterbury Plains. Many people talked about shifting our focus from volume, so from quantity, to value or quality, where quality is not just about the product, but also the environment and social outcomes. Everyone agreed pretty much that there's room to improve animal welfare with a focus on providing adequate shade and shelter and increasing the diversity of the diet. And every group voiced concern for farmer well-being, talking about the high cost of land and high debt levels. Final thing from me is I would say that this isn't just about investing in science. This is about having conversations around priorities and values and how to make trade-offs. So that's social sciences, political science, philosophy, ethics. So we need investment in that as well, not just the natural sciences. So that's the end of the presentation, but I'll just quickly thank everyone who participated in the interviews, and Anita Rieford and Ottilie Stolt, who have supported me throughout my work, the AERU, who provided office space for me, and Bioprotection Aotearoa. And thank you all for coming.
Kia ora, ngā mihi, Elizabeth. Ho mai te paki, which you can see all the virtual acknowledgements. I think that was a really thought-provoking presentation. In fact, there was all sorts of really interesting threads that we could explore that you've opened the door now. Please put comments and comments and questions into the chat. But one question is, so the three groups, which are no dairy, less dairy, better dairy, did they differ in terms of their personal connections to the dairy farming and sector itself? Like what relationship did these three groups actually have?
So I started each interview asking, what is your, can you tell me a bit about your background and how it's intersected with the dairy industry? So pretty much everyone had connections to the dairy industry. So either they grew up on a dairy farm, and this was across the groups, including no dairy. So they grew up on a dairy farm or had family who worked in the dairy industry or had themselves worked on dairy farms. So yeah, there were connections across the groups.
Oh, well, but yeah, you could see some very knowledgeable points of view, the whakamana te tao, and thinking about that whakatauki of ko au te tao, ko te tao ko au, which is I am the environment is me, that very much that kaitiaki tanga point of view. Another question, I guess you opened up, there's comments about transforming economics, transforming farm systems, the political landscape. It's very big picture, and that industrialization of food. And I guess it's going to be an election issue this year too, because of, I guess, the recent purchase of the milk that we produce by France, which is already being politicized. So there's that whole, I guess, that what do social scientists say? Wicked problems. Like they go right from macro scale right down to what someone's doing in their own backyard in terms of farming practice. It is quite a gosh, it's a problem that can be solved, but there's so many what ifs and maybes and external forces. So, yes, that's just a comment from me because it is so huge. And having seen several election cycles where it has actually got really adversarial, and I guess the whole social license or cultural license to even practice farming like that is now in a lot of people's consciousness. But also, as that comment said around, we can't discuss it as a nation. It's really inflammatory. I mean, we even had people out on the streets in Ashburton about water quality. So, it is a consciousness that's happening. So, how did you? There must have been a huge array of values and opinions that came through with your questioning. How do you distill that out? I mean, you've done a really great job, but I don't know how you do it. It's just,
Yeah, I'm still struggling with it. So I've used this presentation as a way to make myself organize the data a bit. And this is sort of the final bit of that research. So we've written one paper where we just focused on the justifications that people are using to argue for different things. So I guess social scientists tend to try and find a framework that they can then kind of use to analyze their interviews and that sort of thing. But yes, it's very messy, and I guess there's also a lot of overlap. So I kind of had those three groups, but for example, the less and the better dairy, there are people who kind of would switch back and forth between those categories in terms of their arguments. And so when I'm saying less dairy wants this, it's not everybody within that group that wants that. It's kind of the majority. So yeah, it is very messy.
yeah, there's a whole spectrum. Like, I was once in Norway, and the number of dairy cows they have on some Norwegian farms is really tiny. But anyway, that less, and then you go up to peak cow conversations. But lots of comments saying well done. So kia ora on that mahi. Dennis Scott, kia ora, has a question. What has happened to mandated freshwater farm plans? Are they still being rolled out across Aotearoa?
Yes, I'm not sure. I know that when I was talking to dairy farmers, this was before the new government had come in. So this was under the Labour government. And they were stressed about all the new regulations coming in. And I think a lot of that has been sort of put on pause now. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not, yeah, if you could add, Dennis, were they implemented by the industry or were they sort of council mandated, like regional council? These freshwater farm plans, they sound really good, whatever. Anyway, kia ora, ngā mihi, Hanarea. Um, did the no dairy folks mention any positive aspects they have observed on farms? E.g., few farms are really pushing forward with their environmental work and diversification.
Um, yeah, so again, no dairy. I only had two people actually arguing for no dairy. And yeah, one of those people said that they see a lot of promise in the young farmers, that they're much more environmentally concerned with the environmental elements, but they are struggling with things like high cost of land. So it's harder for them to actually um, own dairy farms.
You see, that's another factor, isn't it? The land values and those things creeping in around the whole economics. But yeah. Kia ora, Emma Palmer. Kia ora. Thanks for the presentation, Elizabeth. What's the next step with this research once the paper is published? Are there themes you discovered that you will want to research in like further depth, like research further?
Yeah, I think there's a lot. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done. I think it's always more around finding the funding to be able to keep doing it. Um, I would love to see more work into sort of building, like they talked about having better conversations with more stakeholders. So I would love to see research that contributes to that through things like workshops. I know these things have happened and are happening, but from what I've seen, it still tends to be the better dairy proponents have their conferences and their workshops, and the less dairy ones have theirs. And there are fewer opportunities for those two groups to have constructive debates. There's plenty of sort of arguing, but not as much trying to figure out what do we have in common? How can we move towards something that we all want?
Yes, it really does show that there's some um, extremes of people's values, and also, well, with many other issues in Aotearoa, the opportunity to actually have a proper kōrero, which isn't around clickbait and headlines and adversarial, which seems to be a way we're going more adversarial in some respect in terms of having political and other conversations. So, gee, I don't know. There's that what's that common democracy where you get a whole lot of people together and actually thrash it out, but in a diplomatic sort of way rather than placards and groundswell and marches down Queen Street and sort of things. But yeah, let's hope that kōrero can happen. Kia ora, Margaret. Any thoughts on how we can bring these people with very different views together for the discourse? So yeah, based on that, any participatory methodologies? So what would you do, Elizabeth, to really get some of these views that seem to be really knocking heads?
Uh, Again, I guess everything keeps going back to funding, but yeah, I've gone to conferences where you could have you could have gotten those different groups in the same room. You know, you could have had a panel with people representing the fuller spectrum of views, but I don't tend to see that. I tend to see, you know, you've got some sort of spectrum of better dairy or some spectrum of less dairy. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I can see it's a difficult one, but yes, it shows a lot of the platforms and ways we used to discuss things. Well, I'm not sure if they're happening as often, but you're right. Funding is a key area. Do you think, say, regional councils or the industry itself, Fonterra, I suppose, would there be a way of those stakeholders, including the industry and then the surrounding communities, somehow fund those sorts of, but that I don't know if they do that, but it could be that should be done really. If you're losing social license to do certain things, or potentially losing social license.
Yeah, well, I guess because I would say that the better dairy view is the best funded view currently. So perhaps if we were to have a bigger conversation, it would need to start with the better dairy group, but I'm not sure.
Well, there's actually some really exciting new areas of research and land systems management that's actually being produced. You talked about the fencing that's done by remote sensing and things like all the digital and AI and other technologies, but better knowledge of biology and all those really exciting areas that can actually be used to improve and actually motivate, I guess, some excitement about a fast, I guess, an innovative sector. But again, it's funding, I suppose. Thank you, Dennis. Government mandated, so administered by regional councils. Those are those farm plans, which Hanaraya, are the views of the groups you have identified similar internationally, or would they be different depending on national dependence on dairy? You see, it's already having a 8-cowed farm in Norway when they have the North Sea oil, for example. But yeah, that's a good question, Hanaraya.
And also because you have such different systems. So if you think we are still primarily pasture-based, compare that to, what are they called? The confined animal feeding operations in America. So you can see where the better dairy argument is coming from. When you look at pasture-based, looks a lot better than some of the systems they've got in other countries.
Or you mean those indoor systems, or
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh, but yes, also, as you say, Hanarea, that because our current economy is so because dairy contributes so much to our current economy, to export earnings, it does have a stronger sort of political voice than it would in some other countries that are less dependent.
yes, there might be, we have that really good branding internationally around food production and clean green sort of branding around not only our environment but our food production. I think there'd be some international markets quite shocked that Greenpeace is involved here, sort of agitating. I mean, there is some positive examples given in my favourite topic, which is not Coronation Street, it's country calendar. And they often show a lot of the progressive, innovative solutions that are happening across our agricultural sector. So you do see some of these like shining lights of innovation. And at least the people that are doing it seem like they're highly engaged and trying to lead their industry into some really exciting areas. So it's, I suppose it's capitalizing on those sorts of initiatives.
And I guess
Sorry, that
with each of these groups and where they want to go in the future, I was asked, so the question I asked was, what is your vision for the future of dairy farming or agriculture or land use in New Zealand? So this is sort of visionary, not necessarily. So there are a lot of sort of practical questions around, okay, if you were to transition to this, what does that mean there's just so many trade-offs and so many variables to consider. So hopefully it gives an idea of the complicated nature of it all. Like there are no simple answers.
no, and then there are the wider context like climate change and swimmability and biodiversity and as you say, economic growth. Those sorts of discussions are very sort of, they're very politically charged but important. Um, I've got a funny, I was at a, Hanaraya might remember this, but there was a pub quiz question that said, name the top 3 dairy producers in the world. When Hanaraya was asking about that national dependency on dairy, for example, but I was quite shocked about what the answer was. So I will say it's India, Pakistan, and the United States are the top 3. Well, if you believe our quizmaster, were the top 3 dairy producers internationally. So there you go. India is the top dairy producer. So I wonder if going on from Hanaraya's question, whether there can be I don't know, looking at it internationally as to what I know there are different systems in all of those countries, but clearly there might be some keys if the international dairy producers also look at some of their systems, or are there systems overseas by other dairy producers that are better than ours? I don't know. We keep hearing we're innovative and the top of the class in a lot of things, but are we? That's a question. I mean, that's a rhetorical question because it's often just said as if it is. I'm not saying it isn't, but what can we learn from other markets, I guess? Well, I think you've really opened up a fantastic conversation in a corridor that affects everyone, really, to be honest. It's our biggest export earner, and you can't have schools and hospitals and research funding if you don't have a strong economy. So, uh, yeah, but I do hope that there are some ways that some of these big picture wicked issues can be discussed rather than having angry, violent mobs around the place, which there are over this issue. As the protests and also the farming community feeling like they're being attacked. And then there's the rural versus urban, and the whole pointing out, well, the urban water is terrible in a lot of places. Why are just country people being accused by this? So there's even that rural urban divide as well. Well, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your attendance today and those questions and comments. Just reminding you all that the Rangahau Rising has its own page in the Bioprotection Aotearoa website, so will be able to see Elizabeth's presentation, but also a shout out to last month's Dr. Nils Berkholz. His talk is up there, so you can see previous talks. And I have to do a reminder about registering for next month's Rangahau Rising, which is going to be Dr. Sarah Herbert, and she's going to be having from Victoria University Wellington. Her talk is Calculating Hope: How Spatial Modelling Can Help Us Plan Strategies to Protect Aotearoa New Zealand's Indigenous Myrtles from Disease. So that's Wednesday, the 20th of May at 1 o'clock, same back channel. So register now to hear Sarah's cordial next month. So yeah, looking forward to hearing that. And actually, last year's Rangahau Rising with the likes of Hanarea and others, you can still see last year's presentations as well. But again, thank you so much, Elizabeth. This is really important mahi and research that you've been doing, and fantastic. So thank you, kia ora to you and your mahi, and long may that continue. I'm going to close our hui today with He Karakia Whakamutua, and once I have a drink. So thank you again, and see you next month. E te papatūānuku kua motu tātou e te mahe tahi o te rā, kia tātou rangamarie kei mātou. Te hei, Māori ora. So stay safe everyone, and see you next month. Kia ora.